Mrs. Truncota. We are going to discuss EU enlargement and EU reform with a focus on Western Balkans. We see a renewed push towards integration of the Western Balkans on one hand. On the other hand, the EU is conscious that it has to reform its institutions if it wants to be governable when it has more than 30 members. And I want to ask, first of all, what is realistic regarding these twin processes? Because we know that right now the weaker or smaller countries in the EU have right to veto, and a new reform would mean that they would have to lose their right of veto.
So, first of all, there are multiple questions here. On one hand, I think this is a very good news. Almost 1 decade. So after Croatia's accession in 2013, then we had the illegal annexation of Crimea, and then European Union was very much focused on the ex-Soviet space and was very much focused on its own crisis. It was the migration crisis, then Brexit, and so on. So the enlargement in the Western Balkans was not a priority high on the agenda of the European Union. This is something very clear, and unfortunately, this was something that has demotivated some states in the Western Balkans, more clearly Serbia, to advance with the integration process. And the war in Ukraine, we could say, that brought the enlargement policy again on EU's agenda and EU priority, of course, for security matters and not only. But now the Western Balkans are not alone, are not by themselves. We don't talk about the 6 countries anymore from the Western Balkans, ex-Yugoslav and Albania. But we also have Republic of Moldova and Ukraine in the same basket. Now, there are some member states that do not accept this perspective. They don't see the same basket with all the countries together. They actually propose some other types of relations with these countries, of course, being close to them. And that is why the French president, Emmanuel Macron, last year has launched the European Political Community, which is this type of project that includes different types of countries that are close to the European Union, but there is no membership, concrete membership perspective, but rather more cooperation. We have Turkey there, we have Great Britain there, and we have the countries in the Western Balkans and Moldova, Ukraine, and Georgia. So I think that there are now different groups inside the European Council. That is why we are now waiting for the Granada European Council under the Spanish presidency, because a certain decision and a certain announcement that is politically assumed by the European Council will be announced. So now the question is whether the countries, all the 27 EU member states, will agree with either one or the other perspective. One perspective, which I think both Romania and Bulgaria support, is for the European Union to make an exception and to try to offer an accelerated integration process to both the Western Balkans and Ukraine and Moldova. There are other countries, and we can definitely probably assume that that could be France, Netherlands, or Denmark, who previously have vetoed Western Balkans accession, that would practically do not see this exception being made. And one of the reasons is that EU is not fit at this moment to integrate so many states. And as you said, there is a need for a treaty change, or we all know that a treaty change is something very complex in the European Union. It would take for 2 or even 3 years for it to be ratified in all member states. On the other hand, we see that there is a Franco-German diplomatic initiative. Just a few days ago, some details leaked to the press saying that France and Germany are now putting their, let's say, ministries of foreign affairs together in order to think about how this accelerated integration, if it will be the case, how it will be implemented, and what would be, let's say, the juridical situation, because we know that we have the Copenhagen criteria, which which are very, very clear and cannot be changed. They are part of the Treaty of the European Union, right? So any future member state needs to have borders and to be a sovereign state over its entire territory. Or I would say this is one of the most problematic aspects of all Ukraine, Republic of Moldova, and half of the countries in the Western Balkans. So at this point, I would see Romania and Bulgaria being in this group together with Germany, of course, of supporters of an extended and accelerated enlargement agenda for the Western Balkans.
Okay, but if there is redefinition of EU treaties and right of veto
Yeah.
is lost by member states, what
So you mean a reform of the decision system in the council. That means qualified majority in order not to have unanimity as it is now, right? This is the proposal of Germany. We should say that Romania expressed its support for this idea. Well, even though it is partially against the interests of smaller states like Romania and Bulgaria, at the same time, we could definitely envisage that it will unblock future decisions that will be crucial of security and foreign policy. Let's think about how Hungary has abused its veto right, for example, in the military help that EU offered Ukraine. So in order to avoid this type of problems of the unanimity vote, I think that qualified majority is probably the only solution. But in order for this change to happen in the treaty, we would need 2 or 3 years for it to enter into force, right? And the question is this the need of the European Union when it has a full scale war at its borders to change its treaty? That is a question that I think we should all pose ourselves. I definitely understand Germany's arguments, but at the same time, I would believe that starting the procedure to change the treaties might be very complicated because there will be referenda or ratification process in member states, parliaments, and in some countries we will have elections, right? Like in the case of Romania, next year we will have 4 rounds of elections. And every time you have elections, politicians use the European Union, let's say, in an abusive way in their electoral speeches, and that could affect the solidarity and the unity inside the EU. So we might expect that some parliaments would not ratify the changes, like it happened in 2005 with France and Netherlands again. So can we assume such instability inside EU in times of war?
okay, right now, Romania and Bulgaria have as foreign ministers people who are very connected with European institutions, and perhaps
Yes.
in this renewed effort for expansion, enlargement of the European Union, these foreign ministers and countries have a role to play. But what exactly could be the role which Bulgaria and Romania could play more specifically in Western Balkans?
Definitely, both Romania and Bulgaria shared their, let's say, triumvirate in the presidency of the EU in 2019, and they put as a priority the enlargement of the Western Balkans. Now, of course, with both countries have some problems in being let's say, fully engaged supporters of the region. With Bulgaria, we know that the veto against North Macedonia became a big issue also, and it has been criticized by many other countries, saying, how can you support the EU integration process if you use veto and you maintain your veto? And on the other hand, in the case of Romania, we have the non-recognition policy of Kosovo, which again creates a lot of, let's say, problems in Romania being a full supporter of the entire region. So in this case, I believe that the countries showed their solidarity and their diplomatic support until now, but I think they also need to show more engagement in that sense. That would mean for Bulgaria to give up its veto, to find some solutions and not to maintain its veto. And on the other hand, I would think that more investments, concrete investments in the Western Balkans of Romania and Bulgaria should be a way forward, right? Not just rhetorics, because until now, at least I'm talking about the case of Romania, we have a lot of rhetorical engagement for supporting the process. But when we look at how much Romania invests at the bilateral level, the figures are not very high. So again, we need to be present, also helping these countries with their reforms concretely, right? Not just with diplomatic messages.
Okay, both Bulgaria and Romania have rising sovereignist tendency, and perhaps that could matter.
Yes.
To what extent this affirmation of sovereignty in both countries could be lead to surprises and maybe unpleasant for the European tendency, and to diversion from this line of greater Europeanization of the region.
Yeah, we could definitely experience in the last months. We could see both in Bulgaria and Romania how right-wing parties have abused, let's say, public space in order to send messages that have also an Eurosceptic undertone, right? They criticize the EU, but at the same time they attack directly some EU member states. Like in the case of Romania, we had the football match between Kosovo and Romania, and that has been exploited by our far right wing party that now is in the rise before the elections, who has practically criticized and has pointed against Romania not accepting to play with Kosovo and being more strong in its non-recognition policy, which again doesn't quite fit with the realities, because over the last 15 years since Kosovo declared independence, Romania has become a milder non-recognizers, if we can say so. That means that Kosovo citizens can travel to Romania in if they have certain documents. Politicians from Kosovo were allowed to take part in regional initiatives that took place in Bucharest and so on. So we are not, let's say, as strict and non-cooperative on this position as other non-recognizers. So I think we need to be very careful, because these parties are all the time exploiting the failure of other parties in power to offer solutions. And for them, it's very easy to transform such a topic that actually citizens don't know very many details about. And we could definitely see that during the football game, that everybody assumed that all Romania's position is that Kosovo is part of Serbia, which is, of course, not according to the realities. So they can exploit this lack of knowledge and in order to create emotions. And this is, again, against Romania's foreign policy agenda. Our agenda is to help all the countries in the Western Balkans become future member states, because we are a regional hub and we want to have a regional role in the Black Sea and in the Western Balkans. And we cannot do that if we if we play this card, this nationalist card, which applies also to Bulgaria, right? All the arguments, and especially the some very exaggerated arguments of nationalists against North Macedonia, are not helping the process at all. They are actually creating more divisions and more lack of trust in the Western Balkans. And again, the question is, who benefits from this internal division of some EU member states against Western Balkans? I think the answer is very clear. The regional actor that feels that loses the war in Ukraine and feels that loses its influence in the Western Balkans. So this regional actor, Russian Federation, has all the interest to support divisive rhetoric through various types of players. And some of these players are the far right parties in both countries.
Under what circumstances Romania could recognize Kosovo?
Well, the official position that was explained publicly in 2008 and then was reiterated in 2010, after the International Court of Justice position on the Declaration of Independence, was that Romania will wait for Serbia's solution, right? For Serbia's agreement, because Serbia is the sovereign state, and there are two parallel interpretations of international law, right? One that puts the right of the sovereign state to accept secession first, and the other one who says no, the self-determination principle should go above the sovereign principle. Why? Especially when we had genocide involved, or at least attempts of genocide and a war, as it was the case of Serbia and Kosovo, which has never happened in other types of secessionist claims. This is the first sui generis situation of international law. So in this situation, Romania says we interpret the international law by offering the sovereign state first right to decide whether it recognizes, it accepts the secession or not. So as long as Serbia does not reach an agreement with Kosovo, we all know that neither Serbia or Kosovo cannot continue their EU integration process, because this is an important condition for that to happen. So only when Serbia will have an agreement that will enter into force, that will involve independence recognized by Serbia, then Romania should actually take this into the parliament, and it should have an internal discussion whether this follows recognition.
Okay, and finally, Bulgaria and Romania have a very specific issue regarding European Union, the fact that they are outside of the Schengen area, and there have been many hopes that this year they will enter, but also there have been affirmations by Austrian representatives, for example, that there are no such
Yes,
intentions. So, what
yes.
do you think could be done in the case of further postponement or denial of their entrance? And to what extent a mini Schengen area between Bulgaria and Romania is some option for action?
That could be an option, but on the other hand, if different countries group each other and organize mini unions, then uh, a legitimate question is, what is the point of the European Union itself, right? If everybody organizes its own space, right? The whole principle of the European Union, when it started to develop, especially from a political point of view after Maastricht, was to integrate different member states with different let's say, capabilities, and everybody to make a compromise. It was very clear that Austria is not capable of making a compromise, and it announced that it will continue not to make it. So I'm not expecting a positive decision in the October European Council. Maybe in December, we will see if there could be more diplomatic pressure. We know that Romania has already initiated a procedure at the European Court of Justice against Austria. We will see if this will be concretized. But at the same time, one of the biggest challenges, I would say, is again division inside European Union. I mean, citizens in both Romania and Bulgaria have been very much disappointed, and rightfully so, right? They consider that this is an abusive behavior of one of the member states against us, because we fulfill the conditionality, and this is not, let's say, a European way to do it, right? Abusing the veto in the council is not the way European Union system was thought. So from this point of view, I would say that, especially in Romania, when we will have elections next year, I think this will unfortunately become a topic in electoral discourse, and this is dangerous, right? Because this can definitely strengthen Eurosceptic messages, because it's not just something against Austria per se, but against how European Union treats us and so on. So citizens will be more exposed to disinformation. And again, this is a subject that can be very easily exploited by malign external actors like Russian Federation, who know how to speculate these proofs of lack of trust. Right, the fact that Romania and Bulgaria have been discriminated in front of Croatia, who was a newer member state and who was accepted in Schengen, is something objective that can easily be transformed into an anti-EU subject, and that is dangerous.
For a few years, there has been a mini Schengen area in Western Balkans between Serbia, Northern Macedonia, and Albania. To what extent do you think this is a project that is helpful of these countries in their economic development and also on the road to maybe to European integration?
Yes, there are two views here. There are people who are supporting this mini Schengen or mini cooperation, like Open Balkan initiative, saying that this way they get used to the Schengen system and they can already start operating as if they were in Schengen. But other people criticize this for being an intergovernmental initiative, that it actually excludes other countries, it's just for some countries and not for others. So instead of being inclusive, it's actually more exclusive. And on the other hand, this could show the states that maybe they don't even need the EU anymore, right? If they can make their own arrangements, why should they need EU anymore? Which is again a perspective that is not either in their interest or in the interest of the European Union. I mean, this type of perspective that, okay, we can do it on our own, it's against the promise in Thessaloniki from 2003, when all the countries in the Western Balkans were offered an EU perspective, right? And this EU perspective should be anchored for European security. So I would say that actors like Turkey or uh, from outside European Union are supporting and are trying to show the countries in the Balkans, and in this case also to Romania and Bulgaria, that they can do it on their own and that they can, in a way, solve it without including the EU in the solution. I personally, I'm not supporting this perspective. I do not think, for example, that an intergovernmental initiative like the Berlin process is supporting EU integration. I think, from the contrary, it includes just some states and it promotes an internal division inside EU and inside the Western Balkans. And I don't think this should be the future of EU enlargement.